They destroyed humanity's first fleet, then the second one appeared. The year was 2147, and humanity had finally left its solar system. For centuries, people had dreamed of the stars. They had sent probes, built stations on the Moon and Mars, and argued endlessly about whether life existed elsewhere. Now, after decades of hard work, humanity was ready to answer that question for good. The first fleet was built. It was called the Ark Fleet, because its purpose was not war. It carried scientists, diplomats, engineers, and families. 20 great ships, each one a small city, moved slowly out past the orbit of Neptune, heading toward a star system that human telescopes had marked as promising. The system was called Vesa 9, and it held a planet with liquid water and a breathable atmosphere. Admiral Elena Cho stood on the bridge of the flagship, the ISS Horizon. She was 52 years old, with gray hair tied back, and eyes that had seen every setback humanity faced in building this fleet. Budget cuts, political fights, doubts from scientists who said humans were not ready. But she had pushed through, because she believed this was humanity's destiny, to reach beyond Earth and become something greater. "Status report," she said to her first officer, a young man named Marcus Webb. "All systems green, Admiral. We are 3 days from Vesa 9. Long-range sensors show nothing unusual." Elena nodded, though a small worry sat in her chest. It was the same worry every leader carries when doing something no one has done before. She looked out the viewport at the stars, endless and silent. Humanity was alone as far as anyone knew. No signal, no proof of aliens, nothing but silence in 50 years of listening. But that silence was about to end. 3 days later, the Ark fleet crossed into the Vesa 9 system. The ships slowed as they approached the second planet, the blue-green world their scientists had studied for years through powerful telescopes. Cheers went up across the fleet. Children born in transit, who had never seen a planet other than pictures of Earth, pressed their faces to viewports to look at this new world. Then the sensors began screaming. "Admiral, I'm reading multiple contacts. They were cloaked." "We didn't see them until now," said the sensor officer, panic rising in his voice. Elena's blood went cold. "Show me." The main display filled with red dots, dozens of them, then hundreds, ships far larger than anything humanity had built, arranged in a formation that could only mean one thing. This was not a welcome party, this was an ambush. "Open a channel, all frequencies. Tell them we come in peace," Elena ordered, her voice steady despite the fear inside her. The channel opened, but no reply came. Instead, the alien ships began to move. They were sleek and dark, like blades cutting through space, colored a deep purple that seemed to drink in the starlight. Elena did not know it yet, but these were ships of the Threxian Dominion, an old and proud alien empire that had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. The Threxians had a strict law. Any new species that entered space, claimed by the Dominion without permission, was considered a threat, and threats were destroyed before they could grow strong. It did not matter that humans came with open hands, and no weapons beyond simple point defense cannons meant for asteroids. To the Threxians, humans were young, primitive, and dangerous simply because they were unknown. The first Threxian beam weapon fired without warning. It struck the ISS Meridian, one of the smaller science ships, and cut it in half. Over 300 people died in an instant. Alarms blared across the fleet. "They're attacking! All ships! Evasive maneuvers!" Elena shouted. But it was already too late. The Ark fleet had been built for exploration, not war. Its shields were thin, meant to stop micrometeorites, not weapons fire from ships with technology thousands of years more advanced. One by one, the human ships began to fall. The ISS Pioneer took a direct hit to its engine core and exploded, the blast lighting up the black sky like a second sun. The ISS Discovery tried to flee toward the outer system, but was caught by 3 Threxian cruisers and torn apart, its hull plating scattering like confetti. On the bridge of the horizon, Elena watched the death of her fleet on the main screen. Officers around her were shouting, crying, trying desperately to find some way to fight back or run. She thought of her daughter back on Earth, only 10 years old, waiting for her mother to come home with stories of a new world. "Admiral, shields at 12%. We can't take another hit," Marcus said, his face pale. Send everything we have. All data. Send it now to Earth, Elena ordered. They need to know what happened here. They need to know what's out there. The communications officer worked frantically, compressing years of sensor data, the appearance of the Threxian ships, their weapons, their formation, everything the human fleet had learned in its final minutes, and fired it toward Earth on a tight beam that would take years to arrive, but would arrive nonetheless. The horizon shook as another hit struck its hull. Lights flickered and died. Elena grabbed the edge of her chair to stay standing. Message sent, Admiral, the communications officer said, tears in her eyes. It's on its way. Elena looked around at her crew, at the faces of people who had trusted her to lead them into a new future. She thought about giving an order to surrender, to try to negotiate, but she understood now that the Threxians were not interested in negotiation. This was not a battle. This was an execution. It has been an honor serving with all of you, Elena said quietly. The final Threxian volley struck the Horizon's reactor core. The ship, along with Admiral Cho and everyone aboard, ceased to exist in a flash of light that briefly outshone the star of Vesa 9. Across the system, the last human ships fought desperately, but none survived. Within 2 hours of first contact, the entire Ark fleet, 20 ships and over 8,000 people, was gone. Humanity's first journey into the stars had ended in complete destruction. Aboard the lead Threxian battlecruiser, Fleet Commander Dresh Kalor watched the destruction with satisfaction. He was an old warrior of his species, with gray-scaled skin and eyes that had watched 100 worlds burn under Dominion law. To him, this was simple business. A new species had appeared, unannounced and unafraid, walking into territory that belonged to the Dominion. Such boldness could not be allowed. If left unchecked, this species might grow, might learn, might one day challenge the Dominion's rule. Better to end the threat now, while it was small and weak. Record the results for the Dominion Council, Dresh said to his aide. Species designation, human. Threat assessment at time of contact, minimal. Fleet destroyed with 0 losses on our side. Recommend continued monitoring of their home system, but no further action required at this time. This species poses no danger. His aide, a smaller Threxian named Vrenna, hesitated before speaking. Commander, should we not consider pursuing them to their home world to ensure they do not attempt a second incursion? Dresh waved a clawed hand dismissively. Look at what we destroyed. Slow ships, weak shields. Almost no weapons to speak of. This is not a species that will trouble us again. They will mourn their dead and remain in their little corner of space, too frightened to try again. That is the way of young species. They reach for the stars once, get burned, and retreat. We have seen it 1,000 times before. Vrenna did not look entirely convinced, but she said nothing more. The Threxian fleet turned and moved away from Vesa 9, leaving behind nothing but debris, silence, and the cold light of a distant sun. 2 years and 7 months later, the message sent by Admiral Cho and her crew finally reached Earth. It arrived at the primary receiving station in Geneva, where analysts had been waiting anxiously for any word from the Ark fleet. When the data was decoded and the truth became clear, the entire world fell into stunned silence, followed by grief the likes of which had never been seen. Every nation had sent people on that fleet. Every nation lost someone. Vigils were held in every major city. World leaders gathered for an emergency session of the United Earth Council, the governing body that had been formed decades earlier to coordinate humanity's space efforts. In that session, held in a chamber in Geneva, the mood was heavy. Screens around the room showed the final images sent by the Ark fleet, the alien ships, the weapons fire, the last words of Admiral Cho. Secretary General Amara Ose stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly, as she addressed the assembled leaders and the watching world. We have lost 8,000 of our best and brightest, scientists, engineers, families who wanted nothing more than to build a new home among the stars. They were murdered without warning, without mercy, and without cause. This is the darkest day in human history, since we became a spacefaring people. She paused, looking at the faces before her, each one carrying the same mixture of grief and fear. But we cannot let this be the end of our story. We now know two things we did not know before. We know that we are not alone in this universe, and we know that some of our neighbors are not friendly. A murmur went through the chamber. Some leaders called for immediate withdrawal from all space exploration, arguing that humanity should hide within its own solar system and never again risk such tragedy. Others called for revenge, for building weapons and striking back at whoever had done this. Amara raised her hand for silence. We will not hide, and we will not act in blind anger. Instead, we will do what humanity has always done in the face of disaster. We will learn, we will prepare, and we will make certain that if we ever return to the stars, we return ready for anything. In that moment, though few in the chamber realized it, the seeds of a new plan were being planted. A plan that would take years to grow, hidden from the rest of the galaxy, hidden even from most of Earth's own population. The Threxian Dominion believed humanity was a weak, primitive species that would never trouble them again. They believed the destruction of the Ark fleet had ended any threat before it could begin. They had no idea what humanity was capable of when it was afraid, angry, and given a reason to grow strong. Far away, on a data drive locked in a secure vault beneath the Geneva chamber, sat every piece of information the Ark fleet had gathered before it died. The shape of Threxian ships, the pattern of their weapons fire, the frequency of their shields. It was not much, but for a species that had once split the atom from nothing more than curiosity and mathematics, it was more than enough to start with. Admiral Cho's final message had not been a cry of defeat. It had been a gift, and humanity intended to use it. The years after the destruction of the Ark fleet were quiet on the surface, but underneath that quiet, humanity was changing. The grief never fully left. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, cities around the world lit candles and held moments of silence for the 8,000 who never returned. Schools taught children the names of Admiral Cho and her crew. Monuments were built. But grief alone does not build fleets, and Secretary General Amara Osei understood that better than most. 6 months after that first emergency session, a new organization was formed. It was called the Deep Space Defense Initiative, or DESD, and its existence was known only to a small circle of scientists, engineers, military leaders, and government officials from every major nation on Earth. Officially, it did not exist. Publicly, Earth's space program had been scaled back after the tragedy, focused only on studying the data recovered from the Ark fleet and improving safety for any future missions. That was the story told to the public, and to anyone who might be watching from beyond the solar system. In reality, deep beneath the surface of the moon, in tunnels carved into ancient lava tubes near the crater Shackleton, humanity had begun building something new. Dr. Priya Nakamura was one of the lead engineers on the project. She had been a young researcher working on fusion propulsion when the Ark fleet was destroyed, and she had lost her older brother, a systems engineer aboard the ISS Pioneer. That loss had turned her grief into purpose. When DSD recruiters approached her 2 years later, she did not hesitate to join. "We have the data from the Ark fleet," said General Marcus Webb during Priya's first briefing. He had survived the attack himself, having been transferred off the horizon just before the fleet departed, due to a family emergency. Guilt over surviving when so many others did not drove him as much as it drove Priya. "We know how the Threxians attack. We know their weapon signatures, their shield frequencies, their formation tactics. That is our advantage. They think we are finished. They are not watching us closely, because they do not believe we are worth watching." Priya studied the data pulled up on the briefing room screen. The Threxian beam weapons operated on a specific frequency range, one that could theoretically be disrupted with the right kind of interference field. Their shields, while powerful, relied on a rotating harmonic pattern that, if properly analyzed, could reveal brief windows of vulnerability. It was not magic. It was physics, and physics was something humanity understood very well. "How much time do we have?" Priya asked. "As much as we need," Marcus answered. "The Threxians believe young species retreat and never come back. We intend to prove that theory wrong, but only when we are ready, not a day before." Over the following decade, the DSD grew from a small secret project into the single largest engineering effort in human history. Resources from every nation flowed into it, hidden within budgets for other projects, disguised as infrastructure spending. medical research, anything that would not draw attention. Thousands of the world's best scientists and engineers were recruited, sworn to secrecy, and brought to work on the Moon, on Mars, and in orbital shipyards built far from Earth's usual satellite paths, where they would not be easily spotted by any watching eyes. The first breakthrough came from studying the Threxian shield harmonics. A physicist named Dr. Amina Farouk, who had spent years studying wave interference patterns, discovered that by combining multiple weapon frequencies fired in a precise sequence, it was possible to create a resonance effect that could overwhelm a Threxian-style shield far faster than a single powerful blast could. It was not about brute force. It was about finding the right rhythm, the right pattern, like a singer shattering a wine glass with the perfect note. This changes everything, Amina told the assembled engineering council when she presented her findings. We don't need weapons more powerful than theirs. We need weapons smarter than theirs. That philosophy became the foundation for everything that followed. Humanity could not simply outbuild an empire that had existed for 10,000 years. The Threxian Dominion had more ships, more resources, more experience than humanity could hope to match in raw numbers. But humanity had something the Dominion did not expect. A species that had only reached space a few centuries ago, still hungry, still creative, still willing to try new things, instead of relying on ancient traditions. Threxian ship design, the humans learned from captured data, and later from careful long-range observation, had not changed significantly in over 1,000 years. The Dominion trusted its old ways, confident that no enemy could challenge a civilization so old and so powerful. This confidence, humanity's engineers realized, was also a weakness. The Threxians were not looking for new threats, because they did not believe new threats could exist. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued in its complicated way. Most people knew nothing of the DSD's true purpose. They believed humanity had turned inward after the tragedy, focusing on solving problems at home. In some ways, this was true. The crisis had forced global cooperation on a scale never seen before. Old rivalries between nations faded as the world united behind a single, shared goal, understood fully by only a few, but felt by everyone, to become strong enough that no one could ever hurt humanity like that again. Admiral Cho's daughter, now a grown woman named Sophia Cho, joined the DSD at the age of 25. She had grown up hearing stories of her mother's bravery, and she had dedicated her life to finishing what her mother started. She trained as a pilot and quickly rose through the ranks, known for her calm under pressure and her refusal to accept good enough as an answer to any engineering problem. My mother sent us a gift when she sent that data, Sophia said during a training exercise with new recruits. She gave her life to make sure we would know how to fight back. We owe it to her, and to everyone who died with her, to make that gift count. By the 15th year after the attack, the shipyards hidden beyond Mars had produced the first prototype of a new kind of vessel. It was called the Reaper-class cruiser, smaller and faster than the old Ark fleet ships, built with layered shields that used the harmonic principles Dr. Farouk had discovered. Its weapons were designed not to overpower Threxian defenses through brute force, but to slip through them, using precisely tuned frequency patterns. It was, in many ways, the opposite of the Threxian philosophy of raw power and old tradition. It was clever, adaptable, and quick to learn. The first test of the Reaper-class prototype against simulated Threxian defenses, built using the data from the Ark fleet's destruction, was a stunning success. The prototype's shields held far longer than any Threxian weapon should have allowed, and its own weapons cut through simulated enemy shields in a fraction of the time predicted by the old data. "This is it," Priya said, watching the test results with tears in her eyes. She thought of her brother, and of all the others who had died not knowing that their deaths would lead to this moment. This is how we make sure it never happens again. General Webb, now much older, with gray hair and lines on his face that told the story of 2 decades of quiet, relentless work, nodded slowly. "It's a good start, but one ship is not a fleet. We need more, much more, and we need pilots and crews trained to use them, ready for a fight that could come at any time." The scale of the project expanded again. Shipyards multiplied. Training programs for a new generation of pilots, engineers, and soldiers began in secret academies scattered across the solar system. The children of those who died on the Ark fleet, along with millions of other volunteers, dedicated their lives to this cause. It became, in a strange way, a source of hope during a time that could have easily been defined only by grief. Humanity was not simply mourning its dead. It was building something new from that grief, something strong enough to honor their memory. Far away, in the heart of the Threxian Dominion, life continued much as it always had. The Dominion Council received occasional reports about the human species, mostly from long-range monitoring drones that observed Earth's solar system from a great distance. These reports showed a species that appeared to have withdrawn from space exploration entirely after the destruction of their fleet, exactly as predicted. No new ships were seen leaving the system. No further attempts at expansion were detected. To the Threxians, this confirmed everything they believed about young species. Humanity had been taught its place, and it had learned the lesson well. Fleet Commander Dresh Kaller, now an old warrior nearing the end of his long career, occasionally thought back to that battle at Vesa 9. It had been an easy victory, almost too easy. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he wondered if there had been more to that small, primitive fleet than met the eye. The way that final transmission had been sent, focused and complete, right before their destruction, had seemed strange to him at the time. Most dying species screamed for mercy or fought blindly in their final moments. This species had sent data, but these thoughts were rare, and Dresh dismissed them each time they arose. The Dominion had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years. What threat could a species barely 2 centuries into space travel possibly pose? It was an old thought, comfortable and familiar, and like most old and comfortable thoughts, it was dangerously wrong. Deep beneath the surface of the moon, in tunnels that had once been empty lava tubes, thousands of humans worked around the clock, building, testing, training, and preparing. They did not know exactly when the Threxian Dominion might return, or whether they would ever return at all, but they knew that if that day came, humanity would not face it unprepared and unarmed as it had before. 20 years after the destruction of the Ark fleet, the Second Fleet was ready. It waited in the shadow of the outer planets, hidden from view, powered down to avoid detection, a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release. Its ships bore new names, chosen carefully by the survivors and descendants of those lost at Vesa 9. The flagship of this new fleet was called the Redemption, and its captain was Sophia Cho, daughter of the woman whose final message had made this all possible. All that remained was to decide when and how humanity would step back onto the galactic stage. And this time, humanity would not be walking in unarmed and unaware. This time, humanity would be ready for whatever waited among the stars. The decision to move the Second Fleet did not come easily. For years, the leadership of the DSD debated when and how humanity should return to deep space. Some argued for caution, suggesting the fleet remain hidden indefinitely, using its strength only to defend the solar system if the Threxians ever returned. Others argued that hiding forever was not truly living, and that humanity needed to reclaim its place among the stars, not just survive but thrive. The stars twinkled like scattered diamonds against the vast darkness of space. By an event no one could have predicted. Long-range sensors, upgraded over the years using the same principles that powered the Reaper-class shields, detected a Threxian scout ship entering the outer edge of the solar system. It was small, likely on a routine patrol, unaware that anything had changed since its last visit decades earlier. Captain Sophia Cho was called to an emergency session of the DSD Council the moment the detection was confirmed. "It's just one ship," said Admiral Chen Wei, a stern woman who had taken over much of the Ark fleet's old command structure after General Webb's retirement. "A scout, likely checking to see if we've become a threat again. If it detects our shipyards, the fleet, everything we've built, the Dominion will know before we're ready to act on our own terms," Sophia said. "We have 2 choices. Let it observe and report back, giving away our position, or intercept it quietly before it can send that report." The council debated for hours. In the end, the decision was made to intercept. A small squadron of 3 Reaper-class cruisers, commanded by Sophia herself, was sent to deal with the scout ship before it could complete its patrol and return to Threxian territory with news of Earth's growing strength. The engagement itself, 22 years after the destruction of the Ark fleet, was the first true test of everything humanity had built in secret. Sophia's squadron approached the Threxian scout, using stealth technology developed from studying the very cloaking systems that had allowed the Dominion to ambush the Ark fleet in the first place. Humanity had learned, and now it was applying that knowledge. The Threxian scout, a small vessel with a crew of only 12, never saw the attack coming. Sophia's ships used the harmonic disruption weapons developed by Dr. Farouk's team, striking the scout's shields with a precisely tuned frequency that collapsed them almost instantly. A single disabling shot to the engine section left the ship crippled but intact, its crew alive but unable to flee or send a distress signal. "Boarding party. Move in," Sophia ordered. "We need information, not more bodies." The boarding operation was swift and careful. Human Marines, trained for over a decade in secret facilities, moved through the disabled Threxian ship with practiced precision. The Threxian crew, stunned by the sudden and overwhelming attack from a species they believed was primitive and defeated, offered little resistance. Within an hour, the ship's data core had been extracted, and its surviving crew members were secured for questioning. Among the data recovered was something the DSD had hoped for, but never expected to find so easily: detailed information about the greater galactic community. It turned out the Threxian Dominion was not the only power among the stars. There existed a loose alliance of species called the Coalition, made up of civilizations that had grown weary of Dominion aggression over the centuries. The Coalition was smaller and less unified than the Dominion, but it represented something humanity had not known existed: potential allies. This discovery changed the DD's strategy entirely. Rather than remaining hidden and simply preparing for eventual conflict, the Council decided that humanity needed to make contact with the Coalition, to explain what had happened at Vesa 9, and to seek allies who understood the danger the Threxian Dominion posed to smaller, younger species. "We can't fight the entire Dominion alone," Admiral Chen said during the planning sessions that followed. "Even with everything we've built, we are still one species against an empire that has existed for 10,000 years. But if we can show the Coalition what we've learned, what we've built, we might not have to fight alone." Sophia was chosen to lead this diplomatic mission, alongside a small escort of Reaper-class cruisers. It was a dangerous assignment. Humanity would be revealing itself to the wider galaxy for the first time since the destruction of the Ark fleet, and there was no guarantee the Coalition would welcome them, or even believe their story. The journey to Coalition space took months, using new engine technology far faster than anything the original Ark fleet had possessed. When Sophia's small fleet finally arrived at the edge of Coalition territory, they were met not with welcome, but with suspicion. Coalition patrol ships surrounded them immediately, weapons ready, communications demanding identification. "This is Captain Sophia Cho, of the human vessel Redemption," Sophia said over an open channel, her voice steady despite the tension in the room around her. "We come seeking an audience with Coalition leadership. We have information about Threxian Dominion activity that we believe is relevant to your security." There was a long, tense silence before a reply came. "Human vessel, you will power down weapons and prepare to be escorted to Coalition Prime. Any hostile action will be met with immediate response." Sophia agreed to the terms, and her small fleet was escorted deep into Coalition space, arriving eventually at a massive space station that served as the political heart of the Coalition alliance. It was here that Sophia would meet with representatives from a dozen different species, each with their own history of suffering under Dominion rule or threat. The meeting was tense at first. Many Coalition representatives were openly skeptical of humanity's claims, some even suspicious that this might be some elaborate Dominion trick. But Sophia had come prepared. She presented the data recovered from the Ark fleet's destruction, the recordings of the attack at Vesa 9, and most importantly, the technical specifications of the Reaper-class cruisers, proof that humanity had not simply survived the encounter with the Dominion, but had learned from it and grown stronger. "My mother commanded the fleet that was destroyed at Vesa 9, Sophia told the assembled representatives, her voice carrying the weight of that loss even after all these years. "She and over 8,000 others died because the Dominion decided we were a threat, simply for existing," simply for reaching toward the stars as every species eventually does. We did not retreat because we were weak. We retreated to prepare. And we have spent over 20 years preparing for the day we might need to stand against the Dominion again, whether alone or with allies. A representative from a species called the Velorans, tall beings with silver skin who had suffered under Dominion rule for generations before eventually being freed after a costly rebellion, spoke first. Your story matches patterns we have seen many times before. The Dominion destroys what it does not understand and calls it justice. But your recovery, your growth in such a short time, this is unusual. Most species take centuries to rebuild after such a loss, if they rebuild at all. We are not most species, Sophia said simply. We adapt quickly. We learn from failure instead of being destroyed by it. This is what we have always done, even before we reached the stars. The negotiations that followed lasted for weeks. The coalition was cautious, unwilling to fully commit to an alliance with a species they barely knew, but they were also intrigued by what humanity represented. A young species, angry and motivated, that had turned tragedy into strength, faster than any civilization the coalition had ever encountered. Slowly, cautiously, an agreement began to take shape. The coalition would not immediately declare open war alongside humanity, but they would share intelligence, provide safe harbor for human ships if needed, and quietly support humanity's efforts to defend itself against any future Dominion aggression. It was not the full alliance some in the DJ had hoped for, but it was a start, and more importantly, it confirmed something crucial. Humanity was not alone in believing the Threxian Dominion needed to be challenged. While Sophia negotiated with the coalition, word of the destroyed scout ship eventually reached the Threxian Dominion. The scouts' failure to report on schedule triggered an investigation, and within a few months, Dominion Command understood that something had happened in the system, once occupied by the primitive species called humans. A follow-up mission was ordered, this time not a simple scout, but a proper investigative fleet, larger and better armed, sent to determine exactly what had happened, and whether the human threat assessment from 20 years earlier needed to be reconsidered. This new fleet, commanded by a younger and more ambitious officer named Fleet Commander Threll Voss, approached the human solar system with confidence bordering on arrogance. Voss had heard the old stories of the Ark fleet's destruction and considered them proof of Dominion superiority. He expected this mission to be little more than a formality, confirming that the human species remained weak and primitive as originally assessed. He had no idea that this time, humanity would be watching him arrive, ready and waiting, with a fleet built from 20 years of grief, determination, and hard-won knowledge. The second fleet, humanity's answer to the tragedy at Vesa 9, was about to face its first true test against the Empire that had once destroyed everything humanity built in space. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide not just the fate of humanity, but potentially reshape the balance of power across this entire region of the galaxy. Fleet Commander Threll Voss brought his investigative fleet into the outer edge of humanity's solar system with the same confidence his predecessor, Dresh Kalor, had shown decades earlier. His fleet was larger than the one sent to destroy the Ark fleet, consisting of 15 heavy cruisers and a command battleship, more than enough firepower to deal with any threat a primitive species like humanity could possibly present. He expected to find a quiet, undeveloped system, perhaps some basic mining operations or simple defense satellites orbiting Earth. He did not expect what his sensors actually detected as his fleet crossed past the orbit of Neptune. "Commander, I'm reading multiple large contacts near the fourth planet," his sensor officer reported. "Configuration does not match anything in our records for this species." Voss frowned, moving to examine the sensor display himself. Dozens of ships, arranged in defensive formations around what appeared to be massive shipyards and orbital stations near Mars. This did not match the reports from 20 years earlier at all. Impossible. Recalculate. These readings must be in error. But the readings were not in error. As the Threxian fleet continued its approach, more and more human ships became visible, having been previously hidden by advanced stealth technology that the Dominion had no records of humans possessing. What Voss was looking at was not a primitive, defeated species cowering in fear. It was a fleet of nearly 200 vessels, organized, disciplined, and clearly built with purpose. Aboard the human flagship Redemption, now returned from its diplomatic mission to Coalition space, Captain Sophia Cho received the alert of the approaching Threxian fleet with a mixture of grim satisfaction and deep resolve. This was the moment humanity had prepared for, across 2 decades of secret work, hidden shipyards, and the sacrifice of everyone lost at Vesa 9. All ships, this is Captain Cho. The Dominion fleet has entered our system. We knew this day might come, and we are ready for it. Take defensive positions according to the plan we have trained for. Remember what we learned. Remember why we built this fleet. Her voice carried across every ship in the Second Fleet, steady and calm despite the historic weight of the moment. Admiral Chen Wei, now serving as overall fleet commander from the command station near Mars, gave the final authorization. Engage defensive protocols. Let them make the first move if they choose to, but do not allow them to threaten Earth or any human colony. Voss, still processing the unexpected strength of the human fleet before him, made a decision that would prove to be his critical mistake. Rather than retreating to report this discovery to Dominion Command, his pride would not allow him to return with news of failure or unexpected resistance. He believed, despite the evidence before him, that Dominion technology and experience would still overwhelm whatever this young species had managed to build in a mere 20 years. Open fire, Voss ordered. Show them why the Dominion has ruled for 10,000 years. The Threxian fleet unleashed a coordinated barrage of beam weapons at the nearest human ships, expecting the same easy destruction they had achieved at Vesa 9 decades earlier. But this time, something different happened. The human shields, built using the harmonic principles discovered by Dr. Farouk's research team, absorbed and dispersed the incoming fire far more effectively than any Dominion officer would have believed possible, from a species with no prior history of advanced shield technology. Shields holding at 83%, reported the tactical officer aboard the Redemption. Their weapons are strong, but our harmonic dispersal is working exactly as designed. Sophia allowed herself a brief moment of grim satisfaction before turning to the tactical situation at hand. Return fire. Target their shield generators using the frequency patterns we practiced. Focus fire on the lead battleship first. The human counterattack caught Voss's fleet completely by surprise. Rather than a single overwhelming blast, the human ships fired in carefully coordinated sequences, each shot tuned to a slightly different frequency, creating the resonance effect that had proven so devastating in earlier tests against simulated Threxian shields. The lead Dominion battleship's shields, designed to withstand conventional sustained fire, began to fail within minutes under this unfamiliar and precisely calculated assault. Commander, shields failing on the flagship. This attack pattern, it should not be possible. Their weapon's signature does not match anything in Dominion records, his tactical officer reported, panic creeping into her voice. Voss stared at the display in disbelief, as his own flagship's shields collapsed entirely under the coordinated human assault. This was not the primitive species described in decades-old Dominion reports. This was something else entirely, a species that had somehow developed technology and tactics that directly countered the very weapons and defenses the Dominion had relied upon for millennia. All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship, Voss shouted, desperation entering his voice for the first time. Destroy their command vessel. But the human fleet had anticipated exactly this kind of response. Sophia's ships broke into smaller, more mobile formations, making it difficult for the Dominion fleet to concentrate its fire effectively. Meanwhile, human fighter craft, small and fast vessels developed specifically for this kind of engagement, darted between the larger capital ships, delivering precision strikes against exposed weapon systems and engine sections. They're not fighting like a fleet that just discovered space travel, Voss muttered, watching in growing horror as 3 more of his cruisers lost power under coordinated human attacks. They're fighting like veterans. In truth, the human crews were not veterans of actual combat, but they were the product of 20 years of the most intensive training program in human history. Every pilot, every gunner, every engineer aboard the Second Fleet had trained relentlessly in simulations built from the data of the Ark fleet's destruction, learning to anticipate Threxian tactics and to exploit weaknesses that the Dominion itself did not even know it possessed. What Voss was witnessing was not luck. It was the result of grief, transformed into purpose, transformed into skill. The battle raged for nearly 3 hours, an eternity, compared to the swift and total destruction of the Ark fleet decades earlier. Ship by ship, the Dominion's technological and numerical advantages were eroded by human tactics, coordination, and the harmonic weapon systems that had been specifically designed to counter exactly the kind of defenses the Threxians relied upon. Aboard the Redemption, Sophia watched as another Dominion cruiser lost power and began drifting, disabled but not destroyed. Unlike the Threxians at Vesa 9, who had shown no mercy to a fleeing or defeated enemy, Sophia had given clear orders from the beginning of the engagement. Disable, don't destroy, wherever possible, she reminded her crew. We are not here for revenge. We are here to prove we cannot be threatened without consequence. There's a difference. This philosophy, discussed and debated extensively during the years of planning that led to this battle, represented a core belief held by many within the Dusty leadership. Humanity's goal was not to become the very thing that had destroyed the Ark fleet, a power that killed simply because it could. Instead, the goal was to demonstrate strength and capability while still holding on to the values that made humanity worth defending in the first place. As his fleet crumbled around him, ship after ship disabled or destroyed by an enemy that should not have possessed such capability, Fleet Commander Voss finally made the decision he should have made from the very beginning. All remaining ships, retreat. Fall back to Dominion space immediately. Of the 15 cruisers and 1 battleship that had entered the human solar system with such confidence, only 6 ships remained capable of retreat by the time Voss gave the order. The rest drifted disabled among the debris of a battle that would become legendary throughout Coalition space, and eventually, throughout the Dominion itself. Sophia watched the remaining Threxian ships flee toward the edge of the solar system, and for a moment, she considered pursuing them, finishing what her mother's fleet had been unable to finish decades earlier. But she remembered the values that had guided humanity's preparation all these years, and she gave a different order instead. Let them go. Let the Dominion learn what happened here today. Let them understand that we are no longer the fleet that was destroyed at Vesa 9. As the Threxian survivors retreated into the darkness of deep space, word of what had happened would soon spread far beyond the borders of human territory. The battle above Mars, fought in defense of humanity's home system, would come to be known across the galaxy as the moment when a young, previously dismissed species proved that it could not simply be erased without consequence. The message Admiral Elena Cho had sent with her dying breath, 22 years earlier, had finally been answered in full. But this was not the end of humanity's story. It was, in many ways, only the beginning of a much larger conflict that would unfold across the stars, testing not just human strength, but human character in the face of newfound power and the temptation to become something darker than the species it had once been. News of the battle above Mars reached Dominion Council chambers within a month, carried by the shaken survivors of Fleet Commander Voss's disastrous expedition. The Council, made up of ancient and powerful Threxian nobles who had grown accustomed to unquestioned dominance across their region of the galaxy, received the report with disbelief that quickly turned to alarm. "This is not possible," said High Counselor Threxa Moril, the eldest member of the Council, her voice sharp with disbelief as she reviewed the battle data brought back by the surviving ships. A species assessed as primitive 22 years ago has developed shield and weapon technology, capable of defeating our finest cruisers. There must be some explanation. Perhaps they received assistance from an outside power. Fleet Commander Voss, standing before the Council to give his personal account, shook his head slowly. "I have reviewed the data extensively since our retreat, Counselor. There is no evidence of outside technology. Every system we encountered, the shields, the weapons, the tactics, all of it bore the mark of independent human development. They learned from their own defeat. They studied our weapons, our shields, everything we used against them at Vesa 9, and they built something specifically designed to counter it." A tense silence fell over the chamber. This was not simply a military setback. It represented something far more troubling to the Dominion's understanding of itself and its place in the galaxy. For 10,000 years, The Threxian dominion had operated on a simple principle. Overwhelming force and ancient tradition would always prevail over newer, less experienced civilizations. This principle had never failed before. Now, a species barely 2 centuries into space travel had shattered that assumption in a single, decisive battle. "What do you recommend, Fleet Commander?" asked another counselor, his voice tight with barely concealed anxiety. Voss considered his answer carefully before speaking. "I recommend we do not underestimate this species again. A full military response, sending our greatest fleets to destroy them once and for all, carries significant risk, given what we now know of their capabilities. I believe the wiser path is negotiation. If this species is willing to demonstrate restraint, as they did by allowing my remaining ships to retreat, rather than pursuing us to complete destruction, then perhaps they are open to a peaceful resolution, rather than prolonged conflict." This recommendation caused considerable debate within the council chambers. Many of the older and more traditional counselors argued that showing any willingness to negotiate with a species the Dominion had once dismissed as primitive would represent an unacceptable loss of prestige and authority. Others, more pragmatic and increasingly aware of the coalition's growing interest in supporting humanity, argued that continued conflict risked drawing the entire coalition alliance into direct war with the Dominion, a war the aging empire could ill afford, given its already stretched resources across a vast and difficult-to-manage territory. In the end, after weeks of heated debate, the council reached a decision. A diplomatic envoy would be sent to open communication with humanity, not out of genuine respect, but out of practical necessity. The Dominion could not afford a costly, uncertain war against an unexpectedly capable enemy, while also managing tensions with the coalition and internal pressures from within its own vast territory. Back on Earth, the aftermath of the battle above Mars had transformed human society in ways that the architects of the DSD had both hoped for and feared. News of the victory, once it became public knowledge, spread across the planet with incredible speed. For the first time since the destruction of the Ark fleet, humanity understood the full scope of what had been built in secret over the preceding 2 decades. There was celebration, certainly, relief that humanity had proven capable of defending itself against a hostile alien empire. But there was also unease, particularly among those who worried about what such power might mean for humanity's future, and what temptations it might bring. Sophia Cho, now hailed across Earth as a hero, and the natural successor to her mother's legacy, found herself grappling with these same concerns in the months following the battle. She had achieved something remarkable, proving that humanity could stand against the very empire that had destroyed the Ark fleet. But victory brought its own difficult questions. "We could have destroyed them completely," she said during a private conversation with Admiral Chen Wei, shortly after the Dominion's diplomatic envoy arrived requesting formal negotiations. "Pursued the retreating ships, ended the threat entirely. Some in the fleet wanted exactly that. They wanted revenge for what happened to my mother, to everyone we lost. But you didn't," Chen said. "Why?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "Because if we become an empire that destroys without mercy simply because we can, then what exactly did we build all of this to protect? My mother didn't send that final message so we could become monsters ourselves. She sent it so we could survive and grow without losing what makes us worth surviving for." This philosophy guided the negotiations that followed between human representatives and the Dominion envoy, a careful and calculating diplomat named Ambassador Kessa Thren. The talks were difficult, filled with old resentments and new uncertainties on both sides, but slowly, over the course of several months, a framework began to emerge. The Threxian Dominion would formally recognize human sovereignty over its home system, and any territories humanity had legitimately claimed since the destruction of the Ark fleet. In exchange, humanity agreed not to pursue aggressive expansion into established Dominion territory, and both sides agreed to establish formal channels of communication to prevent future misunderstandings from escalating into open conflict. It was not a perfect peace. Old wounds on both sides remained, and many within both the human and Threxian populations distrusted the agreement entirely. But it represented something neither side had believed possible 22 years earlier, a path forward that did not require the complete destruction of one species by the other. The coalition, watching these events unfold with great interest, saw in humanity's rise a powerful symbol. A young species, once dismissed and nearly destroyed, had not only survived, but had forced one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empires to the negotiating table. This story spread quickly among other species who had long suffered under Dominion pressure, inspiring hope that the old order of unquestioned Dominion supremacy might finally be changing. Years later, historians across many species would look back on the battle above Mars as a turning point, not just for humanity, but for the entire region of the galaxy. It marked the beginning of what would eventually become known as the Coalition Expansion Era, a period during which numerous species, inspired by humanity's example, found the courage to stand up against Dominion dominance and negotiate for greater independence and respect. Sophia Cho continued to serve in humanity's expanding fleet for many years, eventually rising to the rank of admiral herself, following in the footsteps of the mother she had lost so long ago. She often visited the memorial built in Geneva to honor those who had died aboard the Ark fleet, standing quietly before the wall, inscribed with 8,000 names, including her mother's. "We did it, Mom," she would say softly during these visits, a tradition she maintained throughout her long career. "We didn't just survive. We built something better because of what happened to you. I hope that's enough." The story of the Ark fleet's destruction and the Second Fleet's unexpected rise became legend, not just on Earth, but across the growing network of coalition worlds that increasingly looked to humanity as an example of resilience and quiet strength. Children across many species grew up hearing the tale of a young civilization that had been struck down without warning, that had grieved deeply, and that had transformed that grief into determination rather than despair or blind hatred. Fleet Commander Threll Voss, whose failed expedition had inadvertently triggered this entire chain of events, spent the remainder of his career studying human tactics and strategy, eventually becoming one of the Dominion's foremost experts on human capabilities. In his later years, he would often remark to younger officers that the greatest mistake any commander could make was assuming a species could be judged forever by its first defeat. "They destroyed humanity's first fleet, and they believed that was the end of the story," he would say during his lectures at the Dominion Military Academy. But sometimes, destruction is not an ending. Sometimes, it is simply the beginning of a story far greater than anyone could have predicted. And so, what began as a tragedy at a distant star system called Vesa 9 became, over the course of 2 decades, a story of survival, growth, and the quiet, determined strength of a species that refused to be erased. Humanity had entered the stars once, full of hope and open hands, and had been struck down. It had returned the second time, forged by grief into something stronger, wiser, and ultimately more true to its best values than anyone, even the humans themselves, might have once believed possible. The Second Fleet remained ever vigilant, a testament to Admiral Elena Cho's final gift to her people. And far across the galaxy, among old empires and young alliances alike, a new saying began to spread, one that captured the essence of what humanity had proven to the stars. Never underestimate a species that has learned how to turn its darkest days into its greatest strength.